This Fleet Equipment Unscripted interview is presented by Hendrickson, a leading manufacturer of heavy-duty suspension systems and components to the global commercial transportation industry. Visit hendrickson-intl.com to learn more.
Hey everyone, I'm Jason Morgan, Content Director for Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today we're talking with Nick Pittinger, Director of Data Services at Decisiv. Nick, great to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Jason.
So you have done us a great service in bringing us some exclusive service data here. We've done this a couple times before, and I'm excited to talk to you again because it's always great being able to track these trends, right? It's great to talk about them once, but now that we've done this 2 or 3 times, different trends really start to emerge. So to set a baseline here, we're talking Q3 2023 service activity, heavy-duty service activity across the Decisiv network. Let's pick up where we left off. So when we looked at Q2 2023, we saw a slight decrease in service overall at minus 0.6% there. In Q3, quarter over quarter service was up a little bit, 1.1%, but year over year up 6.4% versus Q3 in 2022. What are the major service needs driving that larger need year over year?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say over the past couple of quarters, we've definitely seen some increased consistency in the service transaction activity. Over the last few quarters, that came after the sharp rise of service transactions in 2023 Q1. So we saw like an uptick, and then once it's been there, it's been relatively stable. Again, down 0.6%, up 1.1%, kind of keeping a similar trend. As you mentioned, year over year, we are seeing a 6.4% uptick in service transactions. So again, more service activity happening within the ecosystem itself. One reason that we kind of think for that is that, there was a slow arrival of new trucks over, earlier in the year. And as that has started to ease, we see that, those new trucks and others are coming in for service, and again, having, more service activity in general coming up across the platform. When I dug a little bit deeper and, tried to kind of see what was accounting for that 1.1% uptick quarter over quarter, or even the bigger uptick year over year, I did see a big increase in the cab and sheet metal system. I saw that was up about 10,000 or so operations, and that was about 11% up year over year when kind of comparing to what did it look like in 2022 Q3. And when I kind of dug into that, one layer deeper, we're seeing things like an uptick in windshield wiper motor related operations, mud flaps, and several recalls that were focusing on things like fairings and hood repairs.
Well, very interesting too. I know early on in one of our previous conversations, we talked about that older truck age, right? That older life cycle that trucks fleets are experiencing. You mentioned that the new trucks kind of slower to get into some of the fleets. Interesting to see that on the service side too, because I know talking with OEMs, their order boards are up and rolling and they're getting through trucks, but that impact on service with newer trucks rolling into the fleets still a little bit behind there as we look at Q3. And I think, I'm doing this from memory though, but I remember cab and sheet metal being a topic that we talked about either last time or the first time when we were looking at Q1 2023 too. Again, maybe playing into that older truck narrative too as you get into some of the body work there. One of the trends that you didn't mention that I want to touch base on, because it's kind of like a pet project for me. We had seen an increase in automated manual transmission service and service needs rising there. Where are we at with the service volume on AMTs?
Yeah, with the automated manual transmission, we're definitely seeing that continued increase in the trends of service activity for that particular system. Quarter over quarter, we are seeing an uptick of around 7.9% compared to last quarter. Right. And then even year over year, we're seeing a much larger increase of around 34.5%.
Oh, wow.
So again, this is an area that seems to continue to grow each quarter that we are looking at it, each quarter we're talking about it. So, definitely something that's taking up more and more of the service activity happening across the ecosystem. Right. But I also wanted to kind of put it a little bit in perspective. Even though these look like, huge increases, I think they're starting from a smaller denominator of, the operations that are happening. So when we compare that to the other service activity systems, the automated manual transmission still only accounts for about like 1.4% of the encoded operations in the most recent quarter. So even though we're seeing these, big jumps from one quarter to next or year over year, it's still right now, a smaller percentage of the overall work that's happening on the assets when they're coming in for service.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, we've talked before too, maybe more of a indicator that AMTs will need service. I know, I'll put it on me. I hypothesize that this might be the first round of AMTs that we saw 7 or 8 years ago really coming into fleets and rolling out. There hasn't been a lot of service need there. Just these slight upticks there is just kind of interesting. And again, I think it goes back to, not to belabor it either, but that narrative of the older trucks that are still out there compared to the before times in the pre-pandemic where life cycles were 3, 4, 5 years, and now we've gotten up to 6 and 7 and even 8 years in some fleets. Do you see any indication of what the service mix is in Q3 in terms of older trucks still having a good presence there compared to maybe some historical expectations?
Yeah, very much so. So we've definitely been able to, do some of the breakdowns based on the age of the trucks and what's coming in for service.
Mm-hmm.
And when we start to kind of group things, we're seeing, about 16% of the operations happening in the previous quarter on assets that are 0 to 3 years age, 0 to 3 years old, about 33% in the 3 to 6 bucket, 21% in the 6 to 9, and then 30% of operations happening on trucks that are in that 9 or more years old bucket. So when you kind of lump those together, it's almost like a 50-50 split. Assets that are 0 to 6 are about 49% of that total. Assets that are 6 years or older, about 51% of the operations that are happening on the truck. So seeing that good mix, it'll be good to keep an eye on it over time. It's not going to necessarily change drastically from one quarter to the next, since we're looking at buckets that are in years versus kind of months. Things aren't going to shift too much, but good to see that we have both younger trucks, newer trucks, first owners, second owners happening on our platform, but also some of those older vehicles that are still coming in for service.
Right. Well, and I'm gonna make an assumption leap here. This will not be on you. This is on Jason Morgan Fleet Equipment, right? But the idea that in that 3 to 6 year time frame, I mean, conventional wisdom is that's kind of been when you start seeing an increase in some engine or even after treatment service needs historically, right? Again, this is all from what I used to know from when life used to make sense back in pre-pandemic. So that engine need there, it's interesting to see kind of a downturn there in 6 to 9 where maybe you've got some of those figured out. And then, of course, obviously a 9-year-old truck. Definitely a different application, some harder working applications there too as you get into some vocational work. Really interesting mix.
And a lot of the data that even kind of your hypothesis there is being supported by the data that we're seeing. So again, we are seeing for older trucks, a significant amount of the service activity is tied to power plants and exhausts. I think we've talked about it in some of the past interviews of just, early on people are coming in and there may be more cabin sheet metal work, in the first couple of years of that truck's age when it's covered under warranty. But then we see that mix shifting towards, what are the things that need to happen to keep this vehicle on the road and running? And, folks are going to care less about the bumps and dings on the body of the truck and more about the engine, the exhaust, the complexity of the systems there, the transmissions, et cetera, to make sure that that vehicle stays on the road, keeps running. And we're seeing that, as that vehicle ages and goes through those buckets that I described, we're seeing more and more of the transactions happening in those, kind of engine, exhaust, power plant related systems. Right. And some of the other things that we were seeing, seasonal changes always kind of come into play as well. So, that could, put a play into, what trucks are coming in for. We saw a bump in the HVAC systems rising into the top 5 VMRS codes. Probably, again, warmer weather. People are coming in, make sure that the AC and stuff is working here in that Q2, Q3 timeframe. So we saw an increase in operations there. So, again, whether the age, whether it's the weather, there's a variety of factors that really play into, what are trucks coming in for service and what are the types of things that are happening on those assets when they're in.
Yeah, no, mud flaps and wipers for sure. I know as I roll into 2, 3, and 4, that's when I find out that I need new things in that regard. You know what? One thing I don't want to pin this all on the trucks themselves, maybe, or kind of explain this larger too, because I know Decisiv, you have a lot of data going on in the back end. We've talked a lot about the quantitative, right? The number of service activities, what's going on in the market, but what about qualitative, the quality of the service work that's happening? Are you able to track that and have visibility into the quality of service being done and then how that impacts some of these numbers? We
definitely do. We definitely look into that as well. So, we with the service activity happening on our ecosystem, we're collecting tons and tons of data, stuff about the assets, stuff about the customers, stuff about the dealers themselves. And we like to, kind of look into that dealer data and be able to say, like, what is the experience that they are providing to their customers? And, how well are they using the best practices on the system? And is that generating value for them? So one of the things we do is definitely kind of looking at what are those key best practices? How do they compare to other dealers within their own service network? And for those that are performing the best behaviors, best practices more frequently than the others, they're seeing things like better customer experience, more communication, faster return to service of the asset. Again, some of those things will lead to, increased bay utilization and more efficient technicians because they're able to, follow a process, they're able to document it well through the system and be able to, have all the information that they need at the fingertips right then and there and have less, kind of delay and lag time built into that process. In turn, that is also, providing value to the fleet customers out there because, hey, they're being communicated to more. They know where their truck is at in the process. They're getting that, truck returned to them in a faster fashion when those best practices are being followed. And, again, we've seen some numbers around, for the top tranche dealers versus the bottom tranche dealers, if I were to compare their performances, top tranches are, having about 39% increase in service cases. So they're able to do more volume because they're doing things more efficiently, faster, and making better use of their shops. They also have a 15% decrease in their dwell time. So again, that time from when they start working on an asset to when they're done with it, being able to get it returned to service to the customer. So there's generating value for both the dealers and then the fleets. Again, they're seeing more accurate estimates, more predictable service schedules. They know when they're going to get their trucks back and they're getting them back faster and being able to generate more revenue by having those things on the road instead of sitting in a service shop, waiting to be repaired.
Right. One quick thing I want to back up if you could explain for me too. You mentioned the tranches. Can you give me an idea of what that is?
Sure thing. So with the tranches, we're basically looking at around 15 to 20 different metrics for the dealers and being able to say, like, how are you performing on these metrics that we deem to be best practices? It would include things like the use of quick action buttons, whether they're operations, whether they have an RO on there, whether they're communicating to the customer and how well they're doing that or communicating internally. And being able to kind of compare those metrics for that single dealer over a period of time against how their overall OEM network is doing. So we're kind of comparing an apples to apples grouping. The folks that are in a network, they're using the same tools, they're trained mostly the same way. How are they actually leveraging the platform? And when we, be able to kind of compare them and score them and be able to give them a percentage to say like, hey, you're beating the average on 82% of the, 20 metrics that we're looking at, then being able to compare them to the other dealers and be able to stack rank them and say like, hey, the folks that are in the top third or top tranche, this is what their performance looks like across these metrics that we're measuring. And this is what their return to service and average dollars per case and things of that nature look like. And then how does that compare to, say, the bottom tranche that aren't doing it as well? And we see vast differences in the return to service. Again, I had mentioned, 15% decrease in dwell time between the top tranche and the bottom tranche. So those that are following a good, efficient process using the Decisiv ecosystem to be able to, manage that service event are able to kind of do it in a faster time frame than those that aren't leveraging the platform as well. And again, that's providing benefits to both the dealer when it comes to, faster return to service, better bay utilization, technicians know what they're doing, documenting stuff properly for the customer, and then the customer being the fleet, able to have a better idea of, what's happening, getting that truck back faster.
Right. Well, no, I love that because we've had lots of conversations about data and the trends and what's going on in the service world, but being able to put it in that dealer level where it's a quick look of, okay, where do I need to improve, right? I'm doing pretty good here, and here. I need to shore up and tighten up that. And often that means, one, utilizing the platform, but often training, management, kind of the hard stuff that maybe we might want to avoid or not really go into, but it gives us that look and, okay, I've got to go do that. It gives me a good actionable bullet point there to go tackle.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely kind of just putting the finger on where those areas of potential, efficiencies, potential opportunities, whether it's down to a location, whether that's down to potentially a service advisor, because different folks may leverage the platform in different ways. And, there could be opportunities to be able to say like, hey, you're doing it a little bit different than your peers. What are we kind of missing here? Can we retrain? Can we refresh? How can we get that, consistent experience regardless of who's working on the case at a service shop, so that the customer knows what they expect when they're coming in and getting serviced.
For sure. Nick, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about all this great service data and trends. Always one of my favorite interviews. Thanks for taking the time. I'm sure I'll talk to you again very soon.
Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate the time.